Thursday. It's early in the morning on Thursday. It's a little later than we'd hoped, 7:42, but I'd like to call the meeting of the Ethics Committee of the State Senate to order. I need Senator Williams to join me. Chair notes the presence of a quorum. I'd like to ask my good friend from Milledgeville if he would to open us with prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let us bow our heads. Dear Lord, we come to you again, thanking you for the blessings of another day. We come to you with humble hearts, asking you to give us the courage, the wisdom, and the knowledge to carry out the duties of the great state of Georgia and serve the people. We ask that you protect our men and women in blue, our men and women overseas, and our men and women at the border as they work to ensure our security. Dear Lord, heal Israel and watch over those people and heal this world. In thy name we pray, amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. We have one bill on the agenda this morning. That's SB 221. This is a bill that we heard last year, and we passed it out of committee. It's been modified. There's a substitute. We'll talk about that in a second. I need to just make you aware, we convene at 9 this morning in the chamber. So we will adjourn this meeting not later than 8:45. Let me see the sign-up sheet, please. You have a sign-up sheet? Okay, I need to see the sign-up sheet, because what I'll have to do is, since there's only one bill, and most of it is, and I'll walk through it, most of it has been heard before and actually passed before. We'll go over the bill. There are a couple of new sections. We'll discuss that and share that and get response from the committee. But we will have to manage input. There are currently 21 people signed up to address this bill. 21. We will not have time to accommodate 21 people's input. What I will do is I will allocate 30 minutes for input, 15 minutes for those who support the legislation, and 15 minutes for those who oppose the legislation. And I would ask that you decide who you wish to consume your 15 minutes. I will certainly acknowledge and appreciate the Secretary of State being here. We grant them special dispensation to address the bill. I believe Representative Draper is here from the House. She's been very active in this area, and I'll grant the representative 2 minutes. I'll certainly grant the secretary whatever time is appropriate. But we have to adjourn the meeting in 1 hour. Any comments or questions from the committee? Is that acceptable to the committee? Thank you. Okay. I'd now like to ask the Vice Chairman to assume the chair, and we'll discuss Senate Bill 221.
All right. Chairman Burns, please present your bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, you have before you Senate Bill 221. It's a substitute. We're working off of LC 472914S. In the introduction, I pointed out that this was a bill that we heard in committee last year. It was voted out of committee. It went to rules, and we ran out of time to consider it on the floor. So we've reworked this bill. We've modified it. In reality, we've deleted a lot of sections out of it. I believe at the original bill, we've deleted 6, 7, 8 sections. We deleted 8 sections. We've added 2 sections, but what I want to do now is walk you quickly through the bill and then take questions. Let's start with Section 1. Section 1 is a straightforward section that was exactly the same as the original bill. If you'll note on lines 18 through 20, it just indicates that election workers must be citizens of the United States. So any person employed or retained by the county election superintendent must be a citizen of the United States. Not a massive lift on that particular thing. Number 2, Section 2 deals with rules governing residency. So in this section, we attempt to more clearly codify how residency is determined. Remember now, this is the registrar that would make these decisions, and certainly they would be subject to review, but at the end of the day, this is how a registrar would determine residency. The most important thing is I point you to lines 29 and 30. That is the opportunity for anyone who is homeless to be able to be registered to vote with a permanent address, a permanent mailing address of the courthouse in the county where they reside. As you get down into the rest of that section, there is language there that points out that if a person is registered to vote in another state, county, or municipality, I'm on line 36, then they would be deemed to have changed their residency. If they change their residency on line 40, they have to submit a new application for residency. And on line 43, it points out that a post office box or a rental box does not constitute sufficient grounds to establish residency. The rest of the language on pages 3 and 4 are the same as current law. I'll point you to line 98. This is a new area that deals with ways in which to establish residency. It points out that the National Change of Address Program in the U.S. Postal Service and any other factor, including but not limited to some professional databases, aggregate commercial and proprietary information. Again, we're trying to determine the residency of an individual, whether they have changed their address, whether they live in the location where they are attempting to register is the key. And then at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our voters are registered in the correct precinct, receive the correct opportunity to vote. So Section 2 deals with residency. Section 3 is new language, and I would suggest that not everyone might agree with this, but currently Georgia law, and when you renew your driver's license, this is the motor voter section. When you renew your driver's license, right now you're automatically registered to vote unless you opt out. This flips that requirement from opting out to register to vote when you renew to opt in. Part of the challenge we face is individuals would respond that they want to register to vote. They may be already registered to vote. So this simply allows the applicant to opt in to have their driver's license application, if they're new to the state, to also register to vote. And if they are currently a resident of the state, it would allow them to not re-register but maintain their current registration. I would say that the only other additional requirement is they have to be a citizen of the United States and a resident of Georgia. Section 4 deals with elector challenges, and in this section we're attempting to define grounds for a challenger to suggest that an elector is not a valid elector. So if you would look on line 131 and following to about line 139, it discusses probable cause. And again, probable cause for saying that elector is not eligible to vote in an election would be if they're registered to vote in a different jurisdiction or a different state, they have homestead exemption, they have a missing or invalid date of birth. We have some on our election rolls whose dates of birth would suggest that they're well in excess of the oldest age of an individual living in Georgia. We have a number that might be in the 1900 era, which would mean they'd be somewhere around 124, and that's not realistic. So we just have to have a valid age, a valid address. It has to be complete. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the voters on our rolls are accurate and that they are eligible to vote. You'll notice in line 141 that you cannot challenge an elector within 45 days of an election. So we would not allow challenges inside that window. And if your name appears on a national voter change of address list, that becomes the initial step in evaluating whether or not that elector is eligible. And then in line 149, any challenge made of an elector in a general election or a runoff, that challenge would continue through a general election or a primary, that challenge would continue through a runoff. So Section 4. Section 5 deals with really something that we believe is already in practice. It deals with rules of evidence. It's no change from the prior bill. Basically, we would require that certain Georgia Civil Practice Act rules would not be utilized, but there would be honest and reasonable presentation of facts. Section 6, this is another issue that we need to flesh out a bit. This section would allow limited and controlled use of paper ballots in certain circumstances. So, if you look at lines 168 and 170, the superintendent, with the review and approval of the state election board, may arrange for the voting of such candidates or offices or for such questions conducted by paper ballots. And I'll give you the reason why this option is being considered. We have a number of small elections across our state, generally in the areas of county commission or school board or city council, where the turnout is very, very small, low turnout, especially if you had a special election. I had a special election in my county where a commission seat had to go through a special election. The total vote count in that special election was under 500 votes. So, in order to save counties money and to facilitate availability, the county, under this rule, could have petitioned to the state election board and requested to conduct that election utilizing a paper ballot. Currently in Georgia law, municipal elections can utilize paper ballots. The city of Milton in Fulton County recently conducted a municipal election. They chose to not utilize the elections office of Fulton County. They conducted their own election, and they did it with the use of paper ballots. So this would allow, with limited approval by the state election board, use of paper ballots in elections. Section 7. This is an attorney liability clause. It was the same as we saw in the prior bill. It simply protects the non-prevailing party from being liable for reasonable and actual attorney fees as long as those proceedings were conducted in good faith. Section 8 deals with intimidation. You recognize that over the last few cycles, we've seen poll workers and polling officials, polling officers intimidated and threatened. That's unacceptable. This section strengthens the statute on intimidation and includes in line 195, any person, including an election officer or other election official, who faces intimidation or threats, that would be a felony. And finally, Mr. Chairman, Section 9 is a fairly innocuous section that was in the original bill that simply says that if local legislation calls for an election, a special election, then that election must be called. We've had some jurisdictions who have chose to ignore the will of the legislature, and so they didn't call an election, and there was no consequences for that. This simply says you must call the election or it's a misdemeanor. So, with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this. I did have a couple of questions. Page 5, the Section 3, and you started off saying that might be an issue. So page 5, Section 3. Line
Trying
1.
to tee it up for you, sir.
There you go. Line 117 to 120.
Yep.
Was there any concern about the fact that when Department of Driver Services did this opt-in procedure, we had dramatic decreases in the voting registration rolls, and that maybe the cost is not going to outweigh the cost is going to outweigh the benefit here? Because DDS did this, I think, in 2021, and the voter registration rolls went way down.
I'm not familiar with the situation in 2021. The intent is certainly not to reduce voter registration. The intent is to clarify and to make voter registration more accurate. So as we allow people to default to opt in, they register, and then they register, and then they register. And so we have a challenge in keeping that consistency of voter roll accuracy.
Thank you, and maybe some of the groups that are going to be coming to testify are familiar with that DDS situation, but it took place, and it was very dramatic, quite frankly. Also on page 5,
Let me ask,
line 104.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
When DDS did that, they did that unilaterally, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It was done unilaterally. They basically changed their website and inadvertently basically created an opt-in. And what we found out was voter registration went down about 50%. It was like an immediate notification to every registrar out there that we had issues with it. And then DDS went back and changed it. And they went back and changed it to opt-in.
Thank you.
Also on line 104 on page 5.
104. Okay. Sworn statement.
Yes, include a sworn statement by any person. Corporations are also persons, so would that also apply? Would a corporation be considered a person in this situation?
That would be a rule of law, and I would default to the attorney. I would say that recognize that any of these definitions of what might be used in Section 3, Section 2, to determine whether or not an individual is eligible to register, that ultimately becomes the decision of the registrar and the local board. So we're trying to provide them certain guidelines and provide them with the ability to make a more informed decision.
Thank you. And I have one last one, and that would also be on Section 5, page 7.
5, page 7.
Lines 155 to 158.
Right.
Where it talks about, the person who comes in and testifies, they give them the sworn statement, their statement basically be persuasive and reliable. But at the same time, we say that Title 24 will not apply. Okay, so that would mean that hearsay would be allowed in this hearing. The problem that I'm having with that is, and I'm just wondering if y'all kind of wrestle with this, well, in Georgia law, hearsay has no probative value whatsoever. So how do we kind of reconcile that? We say it's going to be persuasive and reliable, but we allow hearsay to come in.
I hear the senator's concern. My current understanding is that the Title 9, Chapter 11 of the Georgia Civil Practice Act those rules for providing information they're currently not in practice, and indeed what we're seeing is evidence is presented at a hearing can be provided by those individuals who would provide persuasive and reliable information. Now, the legal question of whether or not hearsay would be admissible would be at the discretion of the court.
All right. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Any other member have questions? I have one. Back on page 5, talking about residency.
Yeah, this relates to rules of evidence. Page 5 is section. You're talking about section 2?
Well, section 3, wasn't there a federal law that required DDS to go through motor voter? Was that a federal statute when that first started? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Secretary of State, I would say that we in Georgia have utilized our motor vehicle database and motor vehicle registrations, and not motor vehicle registrations, but licenses, individual driver's license, as a valid way of determining residency and eligibility to vote, and we will continue to do that. Mm-hmm. And indeed, I believe in prior testimony by the Secretary of State's office, they indicate that 98% of voters in Georgia have a Georgia driver's license, and that Georgia driver's license becomes the evidence that would sustain an individual's eligibility to vote. So I don't know if there's a federal I'm not aware of a federal mandate that would require us to use it. I do believe that it's a useful tool and that we should continue to use it. And I think the only change in section 3 is we would change from an opt-out. So when I go in to renew my driver's license, I would have to explicitly say, do not register me to vote. I would go from opt-out to opt-in, meaning make sure I'm registered to vote. Mm-hmm. So the registration would come at the renewal point or at the initial issuance of a Georgia driver's license if that individual requested that they be added to the Georgia voter roll. There needs to be some conscious decision on the part of the voter, the prospective voter, to say, I wish to ensure that I am registered in Georgia. Now, there's multiple ways to register. By the way, the registrar's office accepts applications directly, so there's no limitation on who can vote or who can register to vote as long as they have the proper credentials.
Right. I just wanted to clear that up because as a registrar, that created a lot of issues because we had duplicate registration and we were getting things in and those people were already registered. And so it became a lot of redundancy and a lot of work on the registrar's office.
The objective here is to clean up our voter rolls, make them as accurate as possible, and ensure that every individual has the opportunity to register to vote who chooses to.
Right.
They won't be forced, but they would choose to vote, choose to register to vote.
Number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You talk about the opt-out at the Department of Driver Services. So to the author of the bill, I just want to ask this question. Senator, do you believe that it is the constitutional right of every citizen to have the right to vote?
Absolutely.
Senator, you further yield?
Certainly.
Senator, would you have to do more to register to vote with this opt-out process than you would to possess a firearm in the state of Georgia?
I don't see there's a correlation there. To possess a firearm, you would have to go to your local jurisdiction, your magistrate, and file an application and receive a permit after a series of background checks. So this is not equivalent to that at all. Indeed, all I have to say when I choose to renew my license is I wish to be registered to vote. There's this direct decision by the individual to request that they register to vote. When I registered to vote, I did not do it through my motor vehicle. I went to the registrar's office and completed the application form and verified my residency. So I don't see that as a comparable registration.
And my final question is, you don't have to complete any registration to use your right to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment. There's no application to do that in the state of Georgia. We're a constitutional carrier state, so that right is inherently available to every citizen. So should not the right to vote be similar and the same?
I would suggest that it is the same in the fact that every individual can register to vote without having to defend that right. They can register either at the motor vehicle office through the motor voter opt-in option, or they can register at the registrar's office.
If I could point out, you can also go on your phone and register to vote. You cannot go on your phone and buy a firearms license. I mean,
Thank you for that distinction.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, sir. Number 13.
I just want to point out and want to thank the author. This is about election security, correct?
Correct.
And protecting your right to vote,
Correct.
making sure your vote counts,
Correct.
and making sure people are not registering or voting when they shouldn't be.
Correct.
Because when someone votes when they're not supposed to be, it dilutes your vote. And thereby it lowers or takes away your right to vote because your vote counts less.
I would agree with the senator. I would also point out that this is the intent is to ensure that every registered voter is registered accurately,
Right.
and there's no duplication of registrations. And as the vice chairman pointed out, oftentimes I'm getting multiple requests to register to vote by the same individual. It's not that they're being fraudulent or nefarious. It's the fact that the question is, do you want to register to vote? And the answer is yes. Well, you're already registered to vote. You are already on the voter roll, and you may or may not be aware of that, but you should, because hopefully you'd exercise your right to vote.
And just a follow-up, I understand that the senator from down I-16 was trying to make some parallels with the Second Amendment and then the right to vote. But regardless of how many firearms you have, my Second Amendment right is not violated because I can still purchase a firearm.
That is correct.
But if you come to Georgia and you're not supposed to vote, or you vote multiple times, my Second Amendment is my right to vote is violated because my vote is technically diluted.
That is correct.
Which is why this is important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yep. One other thing I wanted to point out, during COVID, there was quite a number of mail-outs done to get people to register to vote. And this created an awful lot of work on your county registrars, that they were getting these applications in, and it was people already registered to vote. And when I've gone to renew my license and they asked me if I wanted to register to vote, I told them I'm already registered. And it creates that question in your mind, am I registered or not? So I think it'll cut down on the confusion to the voters. So I think that's good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One final comment: as you renew a license or generate a new license as a new resident of Georgia, right now the question is, do you wish to not be registered? So I have to say, do not register me. That suggests that I would some way remove their right to vote. And in reality, we want them to confirm the fact that they wish to be registered. So they would make a definitive request to be registered to vote when they complete either a driver's license initially or they did a renewal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
That
Chairman.
ends the questions. If you wish to reassume the
We're about 8:12, so we're a little ahead of a schedule. So my objective again is 8:45 is a hard stop. And I would first ask the Secretary of State if they have comments they'd like to make. I'd have to ask you, keep them brief if possible, 5 minutes or so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Charlene McGowan with the Secretary of State's office. I have our elections director, Blake Evans, with me this morning. We'll keep our comments focused. First of all, thank you for the provisions in Section 8 regarding poll worker protections. We strongly support this section. It's important to protect our poll workers. We agree they should never be subject to intimidation or harassment. We do have some concerns with a few sections, namely Sections 3, 4, and 6. Section 3, which you have spent most of your time speaking about this morning, that would eliminate our current automated method of registering voters through DDS, change it from an opt-out system to an opt-in system. Just from a logistics perspective, this would require significant changes to the automated system that we have right now, both on the DDS side as well as on the Secretary of State side. So we would encourage you to reach out to DDS to find out what would be involved with that. There also would be a time and a cost element that should be considered and allow the agencies to weigh in terms of the resources that would be required to make those changes. But more importantly, the automated process that we have right now through DDS is the best voter list maintenance tool that we have to make sure that our voter rolls are accurate and up to date, and it is the best way that we are able to track changes in address through our Georgia voters, is when they go to update their address on their driver's license, we are able to capture that information and make sure that their voter registration is updated. And it's also the best way that we do citizenship verification to make sure that all of our registered voters are U.S. citizens. And Mr. Evans has put together some data on how it does help with our list maintenance activities and also how it captures changes of address for our registered voters. We'd be happy to, if you want to provide a high-level summary, but we'd also be happy to share that information with the committee.
Yeah, if you would share it, and I believe, I apologize, I believe only mic 1 is working, so might have to share.
So I'll be brief. First of all, good morning. Thank you for having us. So I do have some data, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to make sure that you hear me on this. I went back and I looked at data between 2020 and 2022 and what came through DDS. And 79% of the transactions that we got from DDS were registration updates. So not new registrations, but registration updates in some form or fashion, whether it's an address change, a name change, or something else that helps us prevent duplicates and keep our voter rolls accurate. If, with the changes in the bill, based on what we see in other states and knowing how good our data is now, we would see more people voting in the wrong precincts for the wrong contest and the wrong candidates because we would not get that information so consistently when they move. I'm fully convinced of that. And that's 79% of registration updates through DDS. So I just wanted to provide that information. We'll email around the data as well so you have it.
Thank you. Can I ask one question? How often does a individual renew their driver's license?
I can look into the data that we get because we do get it right now.
My understanding is that my license is every 10 years. Is that correct? So your data from Motor Voter could be 10 years old. Is that correct?
We got between November of 2020 and November of 2022, we got 2.1 million transactions from DDS. And of those, 407,000 were new applicants. 407,000 were new applicants.
And I would suggest that those are the accurate ones. The other 1.6 million was old news.
It would have been at the time of the transaction that we got it submitted to us, so it would have been current.
Thank you. Who's on five? Senator? Recognize Senator Butler. Thank you, Minority Leader Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to follow up on your statement that you just made that between 2020 and 2022, you did registration updates by asking the person if they needed to update or did they want to register to vote.
It was opt-in, so they were already opted in at DDS. Now, they could say, I don't want to send my registration information to the voter registrar's office, but it was opt-in, so they were already opted in. The only other thing I'll add is we did see, so in 2015, so going back to before automatic voter registration, about 11% of our active voters at the time were sent NCOA notices, which means in comparing the voter list to NCOA or USPS data, 11% showed up on NCOA. Last year, it was 4%. And a lot of that's because we're getting that current data in real time.
Thank you. Sir Goody.
Question on, you were talking about section number 3. How long has this software been in place that has the opt-in or versus the opt-out provision?
2016.
Okay, so it was fairly new then. How much did it cost? You have any idea? Were you guys involved with that?
I am not sure.
And how much would it cost us to make that change if this bill goes into law?
We would have to get with DDS on that.
Okay. Good deal. Seems like, and don't get me wrong, I want every citizen in Georgia who's a legal citizen to vote. But it seems like, especially a lot of young people, as much as we'd love for them all to vote, they don't seem to get active in voting until they reach an older age. Seems like if you have to opt out, then you're going to create a whole lot of work for a lot of people. Is it not true that when you register to vote, Secretary of State's office sends postcards to homes with address changes, precinct assignments, you know what I'm saying? What does that process look like? How much time and money is spent, and what % of the people who actually register because of this default function, how many of them actually go to the poll in the next 4 years? Have y'all looked at the statistics to see how successful is this working? Or are we just trying to get a lot of people on the rolls and then 2 or 3 years later we're purging all of them because 90% of them never went to vote anyway? Is that a good question? Is that a fair question to ask?
The way that it works is when the information comes over from the Department of Driver Services, the county registrars will see that information on a screen. If it matches to an existing voter anywhere in the state, then they can compare the two and pretty easily update the information so that it remains one record. And then at that point, the person will get sent a new precinct card that will have their new information for where they can go vote on Election Day. And my most important goal would be making sure that we have the most accurate information on the roll.
I agree with that. But what % of the people who register to vote for the first time because they went to get their license when they were 16, 18, 21, I know they don't register to vote until they're 18, but when they get to the age to where they can vote, they go get their license or what have you, they at that point get registered to vote, correct? Unless they decide they don't want to be registered to vote.
Yes, sir.
And then you send them a notice. You say you're going to vote at precinct ABC, and 2 years later there's an election, or a year later there's an election. How many of those people actually went to vote?
I know overall turnout numbers on my head. To dig into that level of data, it would take a little bit of extra work.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Senator from Savannah. Oh, yep, Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to make sure we keep the facts factual this morning. So it's not 10 years on the license. It's actually 8 years that you can have the renewal on the license. But my question remains about the automatic, opt-in and keeping the rolls up to date. Without that automatically happening, how would the Secretary of State's office maintain and keep an accurate roll of voters? Because it is every person's right after the age of 18 that's a U.S. citizen that they have the right to vote, and that right is inherently there without having to go through all the hoops and hurdles. So how would you maintain that role if that did not occur?
Well, I think and I could be wrong, that once you move, you have a certain period of time to update your license.
60 days.
Okay. But we would have to, it would cause our NCOA list and our other lists that we use, like through ERIC, to balloon. Because instead of capturing people on the front end when they move, we'd be trying to capture them on the back end when we compare our list to the USPS list.
Final question. So it would be your opinion and mine possibly that by removing that, then we would actually be making voter rolls less accurate.
Yes.
Would that not be true? Thank you.
Senator Avatarte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make one comment, just piggyback off the Senator down I-16. That 8-year rule was implemented by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security as a federal rule related to IDs, and so just the causation of when all these IDs expired, if it happened in 2012, would be around 2020, 21, etc. So I think there's probably a little bit of a natural life expectancy of this ID that, you know, this was going to probably happen more so than any other causation.
Senator C. Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could one of you also comment on the fact when DDS made that change, what happened as far as the voter rolls were concerned? And isn't it also accurate that the inactive rolls have actually gone down as far as, because where we do the DDS, that the inactive population has actually gone down as far as the way we do DDS on this opt-in, opt-out kind of procedure that takes place now? But first, can you address when DDS made that change, what happened as far as voter rolls were concerned? And then secondly, isn't it accurate that our inactive rolls have actually improved?
So the first part, based on my understanding of DDS, is they went through a design change. My understanding is that it was still, the person was automatically opted in, but it was a design change that presented the question differently to the voter. That's my understanding. Where we're at right now in our current voter roll list is we have almost 7 million active voter registrations, and then between 900,000 and 1 million inactive voter registrations. And a lot of that goes back to in 2021 when we joined ERIC, and we had the opportunity to do a lot more list maintenance than ever before. We now, as a result of that, see inactive registrations that are going to come up in 2025 to potentially be canceled. And so that's the current state.
Because the way we're doing it now, isn't it accurate to say, I believe it's the Center for Election Innovation and Research says that Georgia is basically one of the models for the nation as far as this is concerned, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And even though DDS did that inadvertently, my question really was, the impact on voter registration was what when they did it, regardless of the motive?
We continue to get registrations from DDS, so that's what we saw.
And when this was done, when this opt-in, opt-out procedure was done in 2016, who was Secretary of State?
Governor Kemp.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Williams.
Thank you. Secretary of State still doing confirmation notices to your voters, your electors?
Use both mics. I can't quite just pull them together because I want to verify we got mics working for you. Just pull them together.
Try that one. Tap that one. See if it works.
See which. I think that one's working.
I think they're both working now.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, notices are still sent to voters.
What triggers confirmation notice to go out?
So there are several different types of notices that go out. One is the NCOA notice. One is the cross-state notice that we have. We have an in-state updates notice, which happens through ERIC. We also, if bounce mail is returned, a confirmation notice. And there are other list maintenance activities that are kind of the mass bulk mailings that are considered confirmation notices.
Okay. When someone gets their driver's license at 16 years old, my experience in going through that with my children, they would wind up getting a letter from Secretary of State's office, you're not eligible to register to vote. They were not asked. The people, and I saw a difference when DDS left Department of Public Safety and went on its own, the decline in the service that you're getting. But there again, someone registers or gets their license at 16 years old. Age 24, it comes up for renewal. They go to college, they move out, they join the military, they go different places. So from 16 to 24, their address 95% of the time is not going to be the same. So that's the important part that I see that we, that maybe skews the voter rolls. That they're not still living at home with mom and dad, but they've gone to college and or they've moved out, they've gotten married, they're in a different town, and they just started off. But that I want to make sure that that's all captured.
Mm-hmm.
So just bringing that up too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? Any further input?
I wanted to make one additional comment. I think it was Senator Williams that had a question about whether, about a federal statute. Our current opt-out system is how Georgia complies with the National Voter Registration Act, which is a federal law that requires that any application for a driver's license also be treated as an application for voter registration unless the applicant chooses not to sign the application. So the current system is how Georgia has chosen to comply with the NVRA. This is based upon legal advice that the Secretary of State's office received from the Attorney General's office. So we do think there is the potential for litigation if this were to be enacted, and that we would also ask, if this were to be enacted, that the General Assembly consider funding some resources for what I'm sure will be eventual litigation if this were to go into law.
And that goes back to motor voter originally. I was a registrar under Lewis Massey and then Kathy Cox. And that back then is when motor voter started. I mean, it goes back that far. It has that long a history in Georgia. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your input. We are quickly losing our ability to conclude in a timely manner. Representative Draper, would you like to make a brief comment?
Thank you very much. So I do have some data to share with you. I don't think I have enough copies for everybody, so if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Be very brief, please.
I will.
We can hand those out.
We'll hand those out. If you'll just provide your input. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to address the committee. I felt compelled to testify today because I have some personal experience with something that's implicated in the bill, Section 3. So I'll focus my comments to Section 3 of the bill in particular, which is the section that would change us from an automatic voter registration state to an opt-in state. In 2021, I was directly involved with discovering that DDS had accidentally turned off the automatic voter registration function on their website. So Senator Jones, you mentioned that, and Chairman Burns, you mentioned that you weren't very familiar with that incident, but I think that incident is so important to understand because it is a view into the future of what this bill would do if it was implemented. So what happened was, in my job, I regularly monitored how many people were registering across the state. In about February of 2021, there was a massive decline in voter registrations. The data that I've put in front of you is just from an open record request that we did around the time. And it shows how many registrations there were just in Fulton County, obviously the biggest county. And what you can see is that, in 2019, we had 134,000 registrations. In 2020, we had 70,000 registrations. But in 2021, it went down to less than 20,000 registrations. And the reason for this was they redid the website at DDS. And accidentally, instead of making it an opt-out function, they asked you to select yes or no. So changing it from automatic to actively having to opt in. And the result of that was a massive decline in voter registrations. So I think it's really, and that happened for 15 months. Now, when they fixed that glitch, when they became aware of that glitch and fixed that glitch, the registrations went up again. And what I want everybody to understand is this is not just about the number of voter registrations, although that is very important. But I do believe that this information that comes from DDS is the most important factor for the accuracy of our data rolls. So getting rid of this automatic voter registration function actually undermines what I believe the goal of your bill is, to make the rolls more clean and to increase election security. When someone goes to DDS because they have changed their name or changed their address, that information is sent to the county election office, right? So all of that information is tied to a state-issued, verified voter ID, an official document. Your name is sent over, your address is sent over, your signature is sent over, your picture is sent over. These are all pieces of data that election departments are using to verify your eligibility to vote in some cases, if there's a voter challenge, your status. So these are all pieces of information that come directly from the voter and they're tied to a state ID that make the rolls more clean. If your ultimate goal here is that, you are doing yourself a disservice by including Section 3 in this bill. Let me pause there and ask if there's any questions.
Any questions? We need to wrap this conversation up. We still have a number of individuals who wish to speak to the bill. Any questions? I have one, and the Secretary of State might be best equipped to answer the question. How many states use opt-in versus how many states use opt-out for motor voter?
I do not know the answer to that question. We changed to automatic in 2016 under Secretary of State Kemp at the time. After we did that, we became one of the top states in the country for level of voter engagement and voter registration. So it was a very successful move for all intents and purposes.
Thank you.
The other thing I briefly wanted to touch on is, there is much in this bill about voter challenges and the kind of data that can be used to assess probable cause with respect to voter challenges. This data that comes from automatic voter registration, that comes from DDS, is the best kind of data for making a determination with respect to voter challenges. I have a bill that I have.
Voter data is already available. I appreciate your bill, but we're not going to discuss your bill today. I want to focus on SB 221.
Yes.
And I look forward to joining you in committee on the House side to get more information on your bill.
I would simply suggest that the language from my bill would well be incorporated into here. It puts a reasonable cost on a reasonable charge with respect to processing voter challenges.
I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I see none. We're going to try to complete a challenging morning. If I could. What I want to do is, excuse me. In the interest of time, I'd like to request that the groups who oppose appoint 2 individuals to represent their position, and those who would favor appoint 2 individuals to represent their position. And I'll grant 5 minutes aside because of just the fact that it's now 8:35. Mr. Hackney opposed. Draper opposed. She's already spoken. Thank you. Mr. Neighbors opposed. Miss Pearson's opposed. Miss Lee opposed. Miss Battles opposed. Miss Wakefield opposed. Mr. Wakefield opposed. Miss Sophanopoulos opposed. McKinney opposed. McLaurin, she's already testified. Thank you. Ms. Last opposed. Ms. Alley opposed. Ms. Breeder opposed. Ms. Watson, oppose. Ms. Page, oppose. Those are the opposition, so y'all decide how you want to, who you want to appoint. For those who favor, Mr. Tripp, favor. Ms. Lee, favor. Mr. Favorito, favor. Mr. Carver, favor. Ms. Reardon, favor. And Mr. Favorito, you're on here twice, so, okay. I accept, first, the opposition. We're happy to hear from the designated individual to present the opposition. By the way, we'll be happy to accept all written input. Happy to accept all written input. Of those who oppose, would you come and present your case? Thank you.
Thank you. I will try to keep it brief because I know we are short on time.
We are.
But good afternoon. My name is Rachel Lastinger. I'm the Associate Director of the Voter Access Project with the ACLU of Georgia. There are many issues with this bill, but I will highlight a few. So in Section 4, beginning at lines 134, the National Change of Address Database is not a reliable tool for determining an individual's permanent residence. It requires the use of a third-party company who is not trained to assess voter eligibility in the same way that an election official is. And to be on the list requires an address change of more than 185 days. Yet many individuals may need their mail forwarded for more than 185 days for very legitimate reasons. Your mailing address should not determine your permanent residence, and this disenfranchises a subset of voters who are required to move frequently for various legitimate reasons. In Section 5, line 155, the removal of the Georgia Civil Practice Act, the language of requiring evidence to just be persuasive and reliable is very vague and subjective. Not having specific requirements for standard of proof will increase the burden that already exists on Board of Elections to review these cases. In Section 8, beginning in lines 188, increased criminalization is not the most effective or appropriate method for addressing intimidation of poll workers and election officials. We agree that this is a huge issue in our state, and it is a problem. However, there are more effective solutions that do not involve criminal penalties, such as address protection, de-escalation training, and funding for increased security. In Section 9, lines 202, okay. In Section 9, the language is just very vague on who is allowed to be, who's determining if it's willful or not. I will cede to Cindy.
Chairman Burns, thank you very much. Cindy Battles, Policy Director for the People's Agenda. First of all, let me say, I think that you're coming to this with good motivations. My concern right now is that there is a large number of cleanup lines in this bill that we need to address. And before I get started on some of those, I would like to humbly suggest that we table this and wait until after crossover and use a substitute to clean some of this up. There's several.
Thank you for your input. You just asked to table, so
well.
Thank you for your input.
We only have 1 minute.
I'll grant it.
Okay, so Section 2, some of the wording actually contradicts itself and contradicts Section 4 of the bill. We're talking a lot about missing birthdays and addresses, but that's actually a Garvis issue and the implementation of the software. So voters are going to be punished because the Secretary of State purchased software, and when the implementation happened, so even if you keep that, then you need to have an effective date so that the Secretary of State can clean up Garvis before we start removing voters from the rolls. I have questions about the section with paper ballots because a number of counties have to use emergency ballots when machines go down, and the way that it's worded right now, the county would literally have to ask the state election board for permission to use a paper ballot during the times when machines go down or even after polls close. And then also, again, the effective date of all of this, because one of the things that you're doing when you're changing the rules for unsheltered homeless people, you use the federal voter registration form. You're going to have to petition the EAC to get that form changed. So we're talking about disenfranchising people before the primaries happen. There's just a lot of language in this, again, that needs to be cleaned up, and we are more than willing to work with you to do that.
Thank you for your input. Thank you. Let's move to those who would support the measure. Who are the spokespersons?
I think Mr. Carver and
Okay, you got to be very brief, gentlemen. appreciate you being here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Brad Carver, Georgia Republican Party Election Confidence Task Force. It's good to be back with y'all after 3 years. I want to applaud you again on a very fine bill, Senate Bill 202, which made it easier to vote and harder to cheat in Georgia. And we're very proud of everything you did. Over the last 3 years, as you know, we've been engaged with this process. We were very involved in Senate Bill 221 last year. And to us, what is being presented today, we fully and strongly support. And in particular, the two items which we encourage and strongly support are to go to opt-in motor voter and everything related to the voter challenge and residency language you have contained in this bill. To answer the question about how many states are opt-in versus opt-out, I'm trying to get that exact number right now. The AT&T cell network, unfortunately, is down, but it is roughly half and half. Georgia is the only state in the southeastern United States that is currently opt-out. Every other southeastern state is opt-in. We would urge you to follow the lead of the other states in the southeast, which are all acclaimed for the accuracy of their voter rolls. Now, let me be clear about this. Nothing is going to change when you go in to get a driver's license. There will be a form, and you can check off if you want to change your voter registration. So that data is still going to be transmitted. What this does is it prevents having duplicative voter registrations, which is a huge problem that has resulted from us going to opt-in. I will note to y'all, when we were involved in Senate Bill 241 back in 2021, we obviously urged you to go to opt-in motor voter at that time. We modeled that language on the state of Maryland. Maryland has since changed that law, and they have gone to opt-out. That has not been a good result, and so I will tell you that the change has led to the issue that we have today with the voter rolls in Georgia. This is not going to prevent anyone from registration. Everyone's still going to have that opportunity, and you're going to get specifically asked that question when you come.
We have 2 minutes.
Yes, sir. On the issue of
Both of you.
okay, there are 16 states that are let's see. There's 8 states that are back-end voter registration. Front-end automatic voter registration is 16 states, and states without automatic voter registration is 26 states. So that means that a majority of the states in the United States are opt-in motor voter. Georgia would be joining the majority of the states in the United States. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Garland Ferrito, co-founder of Voter GA. We have about 25,000 supporters around the state. And I just want to address a couple of, since opt-in, opt-out's a hot button, wanted to just add a couple of things. During testimony last week, we heard hours of testimony and with thousands of duplicate voter registrations, and these have been shown to be I'm sorry, I got tied up here. We've got thousands of these, and they're coming, as Mr. Carver has said, from opt-in and opt-out.
We appreciate your input.
And
okay. You're welcome to submit that in writing. It is now 8:45. There is one question. I recognize Mr. Estevez for 1 minute.
Mr. Chair, I just had a quick question. I'd heard that Maryland had a bad consequences from opt-out. I just wanted you to elaborate on that. What was bad about it?
The bad is that it leads to multiple registrations for the same voter. And that's exactly the experience we're having here in Georgia, is that you get people that are registered to vote in multiple jurisdictions, which is why, frankly, we have inaccurate voter rolls in Georgia. We estimate that and we have 8 million people registered to vote in the state. There are somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people that are not correctly registered on our voter rolls. Now, understand, we're never going to have a perfect voter roll.
Thank you
but
very
we've
much.
got to
Thank
get
you
the
for your
best we
input.
can.
I appreciate it.
Could I just add
I think that's.
I
well,
would say
really
thank
quickly.
you very much.
Thank you,
Could I-
Mr. Chairman. We appreciate it.
Could I just could I also respond to the question? Just for
If you do
30
it in
seconds.
10 seconds.
Okay, we have identified that there are false voter roll entries that are coming from DMV, and I'll submit the evidence to the record.
Please do.
That's so you can have that.
Thank you. I will certainly grant the minority leader a comment. Minority leader, you have a comment? No, thank you.
Can I finish? I was going to follow up with a comment, Mr. Chairman. Really quick.
I appreciate that. I want to acknowledge the fact that we have to be on the floor in 8 minutes. 8 minutes. This is a challenging issue. We acknowledge that. We also acknowledge that any legislation is not perfect. But I would hope that the committee's wisdom would be to continue the progress we've made and give us the opportunity to continue to perfect this language as we work with our colleagues in the House. So I'd like to close discussion and debate and ask for the will of the committee on this piece of legislation, SB 221. I have a motion from Senator Anvartardi. Was that a do pass?
That's a motion to do pass on LC 472914S.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Sorry? Mr. Hatchett, thank you. Senator Hatchett, thank you. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Move to table.
Motion to table. That takes precedence. Do you have a second? Second. I have a second. I have a motion to table and a second. All those in favor of motion to table indicate with the uplifted hand. I see 5. All those opposed, like sign. I see 5. The chair breaks the tie. Motion fails. Motion is to do pass SB 221 LC 2914S by substitute. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion indicate with the uplifted hand. I see 5. Chair sees 5. Those opposed, like sign. I see 5. The chair sees 5. 5 tie. I'll break the tie and move to do pass SB 221 LC 2914S. Thank you for your time and attention this morning. It's been an exciting event. I look forward to seeing you on the floor. Have a great day. Meeting is adjourned.